Today, we discuss all the injured players across all the positions that we think are relevant buys for your Dynasty leagues. We also talk about whether or not the injury landscape this year has changed our macro Dynasty strategy at all. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dyno Construction Podcast. Justin, joined as always by David and JP. I'm back home in Michigan for the Thanksgiving holidays right here. So I want to start off with what are we thankful for in our fantasy leagues this year, guys? Starting with JP first.
Well, I'm thankful that two of my favorite players, Drake May and Nico Collins, look like absolute studs. So I'm pretty thankful for is those guys, rostering those guys in a lot of my leagues.
Yeah, I'm thankful anytime I get to beat you, Justin. That's
have
pretty
to
much
too
all I
often.
played for. How about you, buddy?
I'm thankful that I'm probably going to make it in to the playoffs in our Dynasty G-Gens League. We were just talking about earlier today. I am, was it third overall or fourth in max points in the history of the league, and I only have like 10 wins across 2 seasons.
I think
It's
you're
been rough.
11 and 14.
It's been
really
rough. But if I win this weekend, I'm in the playoffs finally. So I'm thankful I should get to make the playoffs in that league. I'm currently second in points for and sitting on the outside. It's fun.
I'm like
hate when that happens.
sixth and in first, so yay.
I'm going to propose a league median there next year.
Oh, I'm all for them.
Yeah.
It would hurt me in that league, but I love them.
And real quick, before we get started here, just want to give a shout out to my 6th period class because they've been bothering me to give them a shout out here. I'm a middle school teacher. They bother me all the time. So we are going to hop into injuries. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, please hit that subscribe button. Easiest way to help the channel. So we're going to start off with quarterback injuries that are of note. There are 3 big ones. We're going to start out with Dak Prescott. He is one that a lot of people were counting on some top-end quarterback production from down the stretch, especially because he had a decent lineup, decent matchup. So a hamstring tear. I believe the hamstring actually tore away from the bone on it. I've had a similar hamstring tear myself when I was in high school, but you heal easier at 18 than you do at Dak's ripe age of 31.3 years old. Before the injury, QB 19 overall, 18 in points per game. Currently ranked QB 22 on Keep Trade Cut, valued between a 26 first and a late 27 first on Keep Trade Cut. So late 26, late 27 first, somewhere in between the two. Expected to be fully healthy next year. If you can buy him for a late first, I'm probably pretty interested in that. Are you guys as well? David, I see you shaking your head. Yeah.
I don't like spending 27 first because that scares me. I don't like to plan that far ahead, but I would definitely spend a late 26 first to buy him right now if I was confident it was late.
Late 25 first as well.
If I'm not competing this year, but if I'm trying to compete next year and I have it, yeah. Sure. Not many good quarterbacks this year, and the 26 class doesn't look great either so far.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I would definitely send playoff first for him.
Do you think that's a deal that's actually getting done? I'm certainly personally not trying to sell that low if I have him anywhere.
I kind of doubt it, but if someone's desperate right now for, an extra piece for a playoff run, maybe in the draft when people have rookie fever, but at that point, Dak's going to be healthy-ish, probably working out again at the very least. So I doubt you're getting this done too often, to be honest.
If you really wanted to get Dak, you're probably better off going and buying like a Tua and Goff and then trying to trade one of those guys for Dak, because I'm sure probably in a position where they could use quarterback and they might not be as open to the first unless they're thinking, oh, it's buying power for me to go buy a quarterback. But a lot of players don't really think like that when they're contending. So I think that's one way you could work it if you did. Maybe you already have a Tua or a Goff. Would you guys prefer either of those guys to Dak right now?
If I'm competing, you have to.
If you're not competing,
I'd try to get something extra for the injury tax, but I think I would be okay taking Dak back. I don't know. That's tough. That's definitely situational.
Probably use the leverage to at least get a third back. And I might just hold, if I can't get that third.
If we're talking Goff to Dak, Goff's performances have been up and down just because they've been rushing so many touchdowns in, etc. And then Tua to Dak, the Tua injury concerns. I think you could probably squeeze a second out of the other team, and I'd probably be trying to do that just because if I'm giving them the healthy player, I think I really want to at least get that out of them. But realistically speaking, I mean, Tua is the only one of those three guys I feel like really has like big time upside, but there's that big scare there. So I think it's a pretty reasonable, like that's a good deal structure, JP, if you're out of it to try to get. But I think for me, do you kind of agree, David, that if it's less than a second, it's not really that substantial of unless you're really trying to shed the points to like really improve your draft pick, in which case it's a different conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm getting a second, I'm smashing it for sure. If it's a third or maybe 2/3, I'm definitely going to think about it. So I might try to shop around first, but I could definitely see taking a third as a plus there. I like Dak better when they're all healthy. So, if I'm not competing this year, then I like to think they're all three going to be healthy going into next year, plus a third.
I guess I want to talk about that value-wise. Do we expect him to fully bounce back to high-end QB2, low-end QB1 type of QB12-ish to 12 to 14 production, something like that, which is not insignificant, but also not that incredibly meaningful? Or do we think that the ceiling is what we've seen in previous years where he's been a kind of difference maker, top 6-ish guy? I know JP's lower, so I'm going to start on JP here.
Yeah, I just think that with the age, you see his rushing numbers come down. And last year was a really good year. It was close to a MVP level kind of a year, and I just didn't really see him repeating that. So yeah, I'm still kind of a mid QB1 is kind of where I kind of see his ceiling. I mean, obviously he could go higher, but I just wouldn't expect that. I think back in QB1 numbers is kind of what I'm expecting moving forward.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what a hamstring tear does to the body on repair. So from everything I hear, he's supposed to be healthy going into next year. So I'm just going to assume so. Probably a slightly higher re-injury risk, but again, I'm not a doctor. I do think Dallas is going to try to add a big name playmaker, whether that be through free agency or the draft. It just seems like they need a jolt of new ability there. Outside of CD, they kind of don't have anything. Jerry Jones loves that excitement. So, you give him another good receiving weapon, maybe an upgrade at running back, maybe a new offensive lineman or something. Plus, he's healthy. I can see him getting back into that mid to high QB1 range, but I kind of think his high end QB1 days are over.
Send Hollywood Brown there, which we should add him to the show, Doc.
I think we're trying to talk about meaningful players today, JP. Yeah, I think I kind of agree. So in summation, he's a decent buy if you are competing next year for sure, especially if you have one of those teams where you're missing the playoffs, but you feel like you can retool for next year and give it a try. Decent buy right now if you have somebody else kind of in that mid range. Moving on to the next guy on the list, Trevor Lawrence, AC joint, severity unknown. We've heard speculation he's missing the rest of the season. He has not been placed on IR as of yet on our sleeper leagues. They've talked about it. So for all we know, he could be back next week. He could be out the rest of the year. We're not really sure what to expect on him right now. However, we got to try to figure out what to do when he's not able to start in our lineups right now. So start in the conversation with keep, trade, cut, value, and price. He is ranked right at QB 19 on keep, trade, cut, around a 26 mid first or a 25 late first. So let's start kind of that like 25 late first. Or say you have someone else's 26 first that's truly random, or yours that you want to gamble on. Are you guys willing to pay that? I'll start with David first this time.
I'd rather spend a known late 25 first than a random 26. But again, the next 2 years of quarterback at this point, not saying that it's going to definitely be a miss. Sometimes we think it's a down year and it's an up year. But man, if I need a quarterback for next year, I'm looking at some of these other names too. I think you have some options out there, but I'd spend a playoff first on Trevor Lawrence if I was, trying to gear up for next year. I think he started to improve a little bit as the season went on. I kind of think Peterson's going to be fired there, which means the OC is going to be fired there as well. And I think it's hard to downgrade based on what we've seen from that group lately. So I would expect a better offensive mind to be leading that team next year as the coach. I think that's a fair price to gamble if you need the quarterback.
I'm a Trevor Lawrence believer. I mean, and he just got paid. I think their offensive line is not great. The play calling is bad as well. And outside of BTJ, I don't really love their weapons. So I would definitely pay the late first. It's not even like a question to me. I mean, do you prefer Dak or Trevor Lawrence moving forward?
I was going to ask that after the next guy because I think all three of them could be grouped pretty closely.
Yeah, between Dak and Trevor Lawrence, it really just depends on my championship window, I guess, because I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be worth the first plus for the next 6 years, basically, give or take, right? For the duration of his contract, he's young enough, he'll be worth around that. And he has, I think, a 4-year extension that like kicks in after this year. So 4 more years of, based on his age, being worth at least this much, if not more, if he actually does put it all together. And Dak, with his age, I don't think he probably will still be worth around a first if he's producing, but he's going to be pretty close to having to add a second to get a first, in the next year or two. If he's even going to be able to fetch a first, is just going to depend entirely on his production, and staying healthy and everything, which is harder at 31 than at 25 years old. So unless I'm thinking I have a genuine chance to compete next year, I probably prefer Trevor Lawrence. But do you kind of agree with that summation, guys?
For the most part, I definitely preferred Lawrence, but yeah, it's not like a huge gap, I would say. It sounds like it's kind of close for you, but you prefer Lawrence.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I am too. Slight preference to Lawrence, but if I can't get Lawrence, I'd be fine taking Dak for mostly the same price.
Do we feel like at QB 11 overall in total points, 15 in points per game, that's about what we've been seeing from him? Do we just feel like this is who he is, or do we actually think he has the ability to kind of make a next step at this point? Like he's been in the league for a while, guys. Is this who he is?
Probably, but you give him the next Matt LaFleur, Kyle Shanahan, not Mike, Sean McVay, or, one of those guys. If Ben Johnson ends up being the coach, he's the hot name on the offensive side of the ball everyone talks about. If he's their next head coach, he could put it all together and explode. A lot of ifs, though. So probably.
I think situation matters a lot. I mean, we've seen like the guy like Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold. You put them in a good situation, they can be productive. I think the same is true for Trevor Lawrence. And I think he's got a little bit more rushing upside than those guys, even. Not much, but a little bit more.
Surprisingly mobile white guys right there on that list. Darnold, Baker.
Dude, Baker Mayfield's one of the most fun guys to watch.
I love watching him as a goal line quarterback.
I used to hate Baker as an Ohio State fan. He planted the flag after they beat us in Columbus and made me sour on him pretty quickly. But it's hard to watch his journey and not appreciate who he is and respect what he's done. And, you can definitely see the maturity that he's gained throughout his years in the NFL. And it's hard to not be a fan now.
Yeah, just looking at those two guys specifically, I just think that when you do get a better situation, get more experience, I just think that it could definitely get better for him. And I'm not saying this definitively, but if he's QB 19 right now, I think that might be his floor ranking potentially for the next 3 years or so, but can't say for sure.
I do feel like it's much closer to the floor than the ceiling, but it's hard to see a ceiling, honestly, with the way that we've seen him play so far, being much higher than where he is right now, especially with younger guys like JJ McCarthy, currently QB 18 on keep trade cut, right in front of him. Meniscus tear, had a second surgery recently to address swelling, but the expectations are still that he will be ready next season. 21.8 years old, very young guy, injured before season, so of course no stats, but for what it's worth, we've seen Darnold throwing to those weapons, currently QB 8, overall 10 in points per game. We saw Nick Mullins look good throwing to those guys. We saw the Pasternak looking pretty good at some points throwing to those guys. It seems like when you have Justin Jefferson to throw to, it helps out quarterbacks, guys. We just really high level analysis right there.
You add in a pass catching tight end like TJ Hawkinson, a solid number 2 receiver and good play calling, great line as well. Yeah, it's a great situation.
So the price on keep trade cuts between a 27 early first and a 26 mid first. I'm going to, because we're pretty close right now. We almost know where first are going to line up right now. Based on what we know right now about the quarterback class, would you be willing to consider, if you need young quarterback, you can't get it in the draft? Let's look at somewhere around the 104, 105. It could go between those two. Would you be willing to ship that pick right now? It's pretty much locked in somewhere in that range for him, given his upside and the lack of QBs right now.
I don't think I would, because I don't know why that price would change too much between now and the draft. Even if he's healthy and looking good, they don't re-sign Darnold, everything's going his way. Is anyone going to pay a top 325 pick for, a guy that we've not seen play, who was the 109, 108, 107 in most drafts last year? I know it was a great draft, but I just feel like that's a little too rich for me.
Priced at QB 18, so it is as if the expectation with that value, you have to assume that he's starting next year with that, because it would be much later. I think there's some ambiguity, and maybe if Darnold does leave, maybe the price does go up a little bit, which I think it's already priced like he's going to start, like I said. 104, 105. I think 105 might be around fair since this class is worse, but I'd probably just hold for the flexibility for now on, since that value of that pick's going to rise in the next couple of months.
Also, there's probably better quarterbacks you could try to buy for that, or more proven quarterbacks. We don't know how good he is just yet. Have not seen a lot, and there's a little bit of boat factor going on there. Could be a boat.
Yeah.
Now, let's kind of go to that mid 26 first. Say that's all that you really have to spend. I know we don't want to give up too much flexibility for a quarterback, but do you think that that's kind of a fair value? Say we have like multiple firsts in 26. They don't want a 25 first for it because it's not a good quarterback class. They kind of demand that. Are you willing to pay that kind of random mid 26 first for him if you have the flexibility?
It's really hard to say if it's going to be a mid first for a 26, but if you could guarantee it's a mid, yeah, I probably would.
I think I just kind of go back to what I just said, where I don't see the price changing too much, but I do think it's fair value. If you can guarantee me it's going to be a mid 26 first, yeah, that's fine. I will say though, just because it's in the show sheet and on KTC, I'm not trading an early 27 first. I know you can't promise it's going to be early, but if there's a chance that's Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams, I'm keeping it. I want as many chances at those two as I can get.
Or Arch Manning, Dylan Raiola, DJ Lagway.
Well, Arch will be in 26. Well, maybe not. It's gonna be hard to tell.
They want him.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this in the off season, probably some more. But no, this sounds like they want him to start for 2 years. The Manning family wants Arch to get that experience, play his 4 years, just like Eli and Peyton did. But yeah, that's a discussion for another time.
So in a rebuild, which of these three guys do you two prefer? I'm going to start with David first, see if I can get him to mention him. Michigan Wolverine is his top pick. It would just make me happy, especially on the big game week.
It's tight, but I think I'm going to lean T-Law just because we know like his floor is probably a mid QB2. As we just discussed, there's a lot of opportunity to improve that with better coaching, more playmakers. If I knew JJ McCarthy was the starter next year, 100% certainty with given his health, I would pick McCarthy. I do think there's still a reasonable chance they pick another bridge quarterback to give McCarthy a year to heal up again.
Aaron Rodgers?
Complete his Brett Favre arc. It's possible. I doubt he's with the Jets next year.
Oh, man. Well, yeah, JJ McCarthy, it's between him and Trevor Lawrence. For me, I'm debating, okay, do I want a guy who I know has a really good situation he's stepping into and could rise to being a top 10 quarterback with a strong first season, or the safety of Trevor Lawrence? And with experiencing some of the kind of ups and downs of a guy like Anthony Richardson and having that, where you think you have a guy who might be a starting quarterback and then you're like, oh, I don't know. I think I would stick with Lawrence at this time, but the upside of McCarthy is definitely intriguing. It's close. It's really close for me.
Of course, I probably feel like Lawrence is the safe play here. I'm probably swinging for JJ though, because
can't blame you.
Out of these guys, I think like if I can buy them for a same price, if I have if I have a running back, a Joe Mixon type that they tell me like, hey, like I'll give you like a first valuation for him, like trading him for pick Trevor Lawrence or JJ McCarthy, like they have him on IR and they're trying to like buy their running back that way, for example, like I would probably, if I'm rebuilding, prefer the upside of a JJ McCarthy, just the ability that he has to, with the offense, the weapons he's throwing to, he already has the good situation. He already has the quarterback, the weapons that we're talking about. He already has the coach, the weapons we're talking about that we want Lawrence to get. So just the fact that he's in that situation, I think that's like one of the big takeaways I'd try to take from this off season of like, we were trying to bet on the next Jordan Love,
Yeah.
That guy that comes out of nowhere really rises up in value. And we talked about this on a previous episode. That's probably situation, right? Is the big thing. That's the reason why, you have Levis who has some tools and some ability, right? To a bad situation, questionable coaching. We have Bryce Young, maybe decent coaching, and he's actually seems to be turning things around recently. Like
that last game against the Chiefs was really good. Not gonna lie,
but it's not a good situation. It was not a good situation to bet on because the weapons are mediocre. The coaching is. We think it's a better coach, sure, but like it's just. I mean, they have terrible GM that just is going to sabotage everything. Probably, anyways. He's going to fire that coach before he has a chance to turn it around, anyways. So, like, I do think just the JJ situation for me, the JJ McCarthy, not Justin Jefferson. I guess both parts are part of the situation. Justin Jefferson has a lot to do with why I like him. Is why I think he for me is the kind of easy answer for. Even though it's a little bit riskier for sure.
I'll just say I think the state of my quarterback room has a lot to do with that too. If I've got a stud QB1 and I'm comfortable with my QB2 for the next few years, probably would take an upside swing on McCarthy. If I don't have a QB room at all and I'm rebuilding like completely torn to the studs, I would like the consistency of a quarterback that I can count on, and I think Lawrence is that.
And what I will say, what maybe almost consider JJ McCarthy too was just the research in the offseason about how rookie quarterbacks typically hold their value. They either rise or they stay around the same typically, even if they have a bad situation for the most part. Like a guy like we saw like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence after their first year. But I don't know if it quite applies when it's in their second year, even though it's essentially their rookie year, because, there might be a little bit of name fatigue potentially when you're going into the third year. I cannot blame you at all for taking McCarthy.
All right. And last quarterback that's injured, real brief, Deshaun Watson, torn Achilles, almost 30 years old. Historically bad quarterback season, currently QB 49, less than a 27 fourth on keep trade cut. Guys, is he even worth having on IR?
I mean, if you got a spot, sure, but I'd rather have handcuff running backs and backup quarterbacks that have an actual chance to play in the next year and a half.
On a deep roster, I'll say yes on an IR spot, but on a shallow one, probably not worth it.
Yeah, he is not exactly someone you like seeing on your roster at this point. How he has fallen. Moving on to wide receivers next. So wide receivers, there have been a lot of injuries this year to this position. It has hurt a lot of teams. We're going to go first talking through the guys who are out the rest of the year. So starting with Rashee Rice. We've talked about him a bit already. PLC tier, 24 and a half years old. Before the injury was wide receiver 2 overall, 3 in points per game. Currently wide receiver 15 on keep trade cut. Of course, there's coming back from the injury. There's possible legal concerns. At wide receiver 15 prices, I mean, we had him higher than that in our most recent tier. Like, that's a screaming buy to me. Do you guys agree with that at that wide receiver 15 price if you're rebuilding?
Yeah, I think the price is listed here. It's an early 26 first. I might want to keep the flexibility just because I'm assuming that's my pick in a rebuild. I don't really like to trade my picks when I'm rebuilding, but yeah, certainly a mid 25 first, I'd be smashing that. But early 26, I have to think about.
Yeah, if it's a mid 25 first, yeah, I would definitely take Rashee Rice. And I did look more into the severity of the injury, and I guess it looks like the timeline is very, very similar to that of a torn ACL. So there is a chance that the first month or two that he's back, that he starts out kind of slow, and then there's the suspension stuff. So maybe next year it'll be hard to really rely on him in the first 8 to 10 weeks, and it might just be more, honestly, might be just towards the playoff time when you're really getting a full Rashee Rice. But I mean, we saw the ceiling, obviously, like with wide receiver 3 points per game, Travis Kelce aging in a great offense, a great environment where he's getting hyper targeted. Yeah, I mean, for a mid 25 first, I think that's a smash though.
Yeah, absolutely love him as a buy. I think that point, of course, about the injury concerns, the legal concerns, it's a valid concern, of course. I think he's a good buy at this point on a contender or a rebuilder. If you have the ammo to spend on a contender and you can get the injury discount right now off of someone, probably a little late in the season. If they were going to sell him, they're probably going to already. But if you are a rebuilder and you see him on somebody else's roster who is competing, you got some aging out pieces, or even if you're a middle of the pack team, if I'm looking like I'm going to sneak in as the 5th or 6th spot and I have a Cooper Kupp type, somebody like that, Terry McLaurin, and I can add a little bit to one of those guys. If I can add a second to McLaurin, if I can add a second and a third to Kupp to get up to him, I'm interested in doing that type of deal as well. You kind of agree with that structure as well?
Well, sure. If I can get him without giving up a first or another young stud, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to add a first to one of those guys if it's a late first?
I think I'd rather try and shop Kupp or McLaurin separately and see what I can do that way.
I think Kupp I would, but not McLaurin. And real quick, what just crossed my mind is if he is suspended for the first 4 to 6 games, that actually might be in line with his recovery, if he does start out slow.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. Like, do they have to wait till he's healthy? And can the Chiefs lie and say he's healthy on the 53 to start the season and then let him get suspended?
Yeah, I mean, he was injured week 3, so I mean, it is very reasonable that he would be at least healthy enough to be on the field week 1. With Brooks, it was week 10 in college football or something like that. And he's just not getting back, and that took longer than expected. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to consider, because maybe then when he's back, he might be really close to 100% if he is actually suspended.
All right. And moving on to one of JP's favorite wide receivers, Brandon Ayuk, torn ACL, MCL, meniscus, the trifecta, 26.7 years old, will be 27 before he takes the football field again. Before injury, was wide receiver 43 overall, wide receiver 55 in points per game. So not really having a fantastic year. JP's brought up, that issue potentially with, was it the holdout, him getting up to speed, not being, ready to hit the ground running, etc. But currently wide receiver 26 on keep trade cut, ranked somewhere between a 25 late first and a 27 mid first on keep trade cut. So if you have a 25 late first, 1, 10, 11, 12, are we moving that for a wide receiver his age coming off of injury at this point, guys?
Kind of want to hold the first, but I think that's fair value.
I have not been able to get any first for him anywhere.
Doesn't surprise me. I feel like once he gets healthy again, you'll probably be able to, though.
Yeah, I do think the problem a lot of time with trying to buy these injured guys is teams that are competing usually don't want to take a first, and people that are rebuilding who want to get these types of players usually don't want to sell a first to get them, you know? So a lot of times we have to try to get more creative getting these injured players. I know JP can be very good at trying to offer a tier up option where you send, you know, JP was able to get another injured player we'll talk about later and a first for Tyreek Hill off of me. So a lot of times, like, getting creative with those types of deals, I think is a lot easier. It's very difficult to get the first valuation for these injured players or get the cash price because usually the people who have the firsts are already rebuilding. And well, maybe it's not actually a bad process to try to buy these injured players at like this type of a cash price. It's probably lower than it'll be when they're healthy. It's just hard to give them that flexibility because how do you know that's what you'll need to spend that first on?
Yeah, I do think when the offseason hits, that yeah, his value probably will creep up a little bit. And to speak to him starting slow, CeeDee Lamb, he recently was another holdout, and he recently said that when he first came back in that first month, he said his footwork was just a little bit off, just the details and the timing. He didn't feel completely like himself until a little bit, towards the midpoint of the season. So I do think that's the reason why he didn't produce as much. But honestly, with the emergence of Jawan Jennings and then drafting Pearsall and then maybe Debo being back with Kittle and CMC, I'm not nearly as bullish as I was before because I thought before that Debo could be gone, and I didn't really think that Jawan Jennings was a guy. I don't think any of us really knew that. So, in which Jawan Jennings, he's pretty much playing the Ayuk role and he's doing a good job. He just does not offer that same explosiveness. I think he ran like a 4.7 40-yard dash, and you could see he's not very explosive down the field. But I mean, he clearly is a guy who's good enough to get snaps and demand targets. So yeah, I'm not nearly as bullish. And I was hoping I could sell him. I sold one share, but I had a lot. And at this point, it's just probably better to hold. I wouldn't recommend selling him at wide receiver 26 price.
You sold him to me too, I believe, right?
I did.
Kind of had an idea for a follow-up segment in the offseason. Just be kind of interesting to look back. I know we've all bought and sold these players in this segment a few times. Maybe look back at the trades and say, did we rush to buy players, and buy them before the dip was at its lowest? Did we buy them at the right time? That kind of thing. Because I do think a couple of the deals I've made for these guys are going to stand the test of time. I think a couple of them, though, maybe I look back on and I wish I hadn't made them.
That's very fair. I had a rebuilding team where I traded T. Higgins for Ayuk and a third. And this was immediately after the injury, before we even knew everything that we didn't know, how messy it was, etc. In fact, it was before the tears were even confirmed, when they were just panicking. Yeah, I kind of regret that trade a little bit. It's nice to have the extra third. Higgins versus Ayuk. It's kind of a dealer's choice, Higgins situation. We'll see where it winds up, but I'd probably rather have the younger guy at this point. So just jumping right on the injury right away, I think that's a very good point about making sure, like, are we making a sound move, or are we just like, we see injury, we see potential dip, and are we buying at the right point? That's a good thing to dive into at a later date, I think.
And the injury's bad. I mean, like you said, it's the trifecta, the ACL, MCL, and meniscus. And it wasn't like it was week 2 or 3. I think it's more like week 5 through 7, sometime in that time range. So yeah, he might not be 100% until really late in the year. I mean, clean ACL, usually it takes about 12 months to get to full health, but without it being clean, yeah, it's pretty scary. And he might not be really impactful again until like 2026, really.
But boy, will he be impactful then when they don't have Debo or Kittle and Jennings is gone, maybe.
CMC will be old, George Kittle.
Right. So you're saying there's a chance. Moving on to a guy who was wide receiver 1 overall before his week 7 injury, 4th in points per game though. 28.7-year-old Chris Godwin dislocated his ankle, 12-week recovery. Theory could come back in the playoffs. I don't think that's expected at all, but based off of that theoretical timeline, right?
I saw a whisper that he might be able to if they sneak in.
Currently wide receiver 37 on Keep Trade Cut, ranked somewhere between a 27 late first. Of course, we're not actually realistically looking to send a 27 first for a old wide receiver. 25 early second is the other pick right around him. I think that's more the price point we could be comfortable paying. A lot of uncertainty here. We don't know the contract situation. So let's start out with a 25 early second. It's top 3 guaranteed at this point. Are you willing to pay that for Godwin, or is that too steep at this point?
I am going to hold the pick just because I really like the depth of this class. I think we could see a day 2 running running back with a starting role going at 201, 202, 203. I think we could see a first-round receiver in a good situation going there. I think we could see a quarterback who went, in the second round in a good situation in that range. I want to hold my 25 seconds right now because I really like the depth in this class. And Godwin was great, but there's a lot of uncertainty. He's going to be 29 before he plays again. I think a second for a healthy 29-year-old receiver is typically kind of high end of what I'm willing to spend in general. So the fact that he's unhealthy, I think I'm going to hold the pick.
I got like 7 seconds in the league, David, if you want to start shopping around. But no,
hey, man, hit me up.
If he was a year or two younger, it would be a full smash that I would definitely send that. I think there's a chance that there might be a tier break around that 201, 202 point. I mean, if he says 204, I'm probably taking Godwin every time. The thing is I kind of want to think of it as, do we kind of view him like a Cooper Kupp kind of player? Because before the season started, we're like, well, he's probably a low or late first in value. And it's like, is Godwin going to have that kind of impact? Because if he does, then I think he's 100% worth it. He's a true hammer. I mean, wide receiver 1 overall. He is a free agent, so there is definitely some ambiguity. We haven't seen him be great the last couple of years before. I mean, he was fine. He wasn't bad by any stretch, but this is definitely an outlier kind of a season that we've seen from him.
I do think, I could be wrong on this, but I think I saw there a couple of void years on Godwin's contract, which would incentivize them to extend him. Otherwise, they have to pay that up front on next year's cap. I don't think it was huge, though, so it's not like they have to re-sign him, just a little incentive.
I'm sure they'd like to. With Evans' age, it would be hard to see them not bring him back, but never know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely sure that they would like to bring him back. It's just the question of if the money makes sense, etc. Baker Mayfield's contract is not egregious. There's a rising cap.
Mm-hmm.
It's plausible they bring him back. If I knew he was being brought back in the same situation, I'd be smashing the early second. I'd be trading the early second for him all day. But that ambiguity, the possibility of winding up in Carolina or something, that I just don't like the situation as much. Could go to Kansas City, could go to Carolina, could stay there. Like, the range of outcomes is just very large. I'd probably rather stay flexible if I know it's really early, but I think I'm pretty similar with the same line on JP of if it's like 204-ish, 205, like that's when it's not so early anymore. You're no longer in that, can I add the 212 to this pick to get up into the first round? Like you can do a lot with the 203. Everyone wants the 202. Not everybody wants Chris Godwin coming off of this injury. Is just, so I don't want you guys to think we hate Chris Godwin. It's just the flexibility for us, right?
Yeah. He's going to be 29 years old on top of that ambiguity.
Exactly. I'd smash a mid-second, but early second is where I still think you're going to get a quality player.
I mean, historically, I don't think early second we're going to actually end up getting a quality player. We always are very enthusiastic about mid to early second rounders. Sometimes there's quality players littered in there, but historically it's not a great pick. It's just the ability to do a bunch of other stuff for it, I think.
You're not wrong, Justin, but may I recommend going to watch our video from a couple weeks ago on the 25 class. A lot of players in there, a lot of talent. I think you might learn something.
I just think that the lack of quarterbacks is what's going to probably just devalue the second round, right? Last year we had 5 quarterbacks that were going in the first round of rookie drafts, or potentially, first, early, second. That really pushed other value down. I don't think we have those value pushers, the people to push the value down so much anymore.
There's a chance, though, that there's 3 or 4 that are in that top 15. I just think it's not as top heavy, but yeah, it's not a guarantee. 1 or 2 of those guys could go day 2, and it could really knock them out of the conversation as a top 15 rookie pick.
Yeah, but then if you get like a high second rounder in a good situation and a guy with talent, and he's sitting there at the 202,
I think that when Breece Hall went as an early second in a good situation, he was like 104, 103, maybe higher, right? So
he was pretty universally the 101 that year.
Was that right? Okay.
But what if your guy Jackson Dart goes early second, JP? You prefer him to Godwin, I assume,
It definitely depends. I mean, if he's not going to look like a starter.
I'm saying if he's an early second round pick in the NFL draft.
Oh, okay. I don't know. It's kind of 50-50. I guess it would be kind of situational at that point.
So I think we found his price. If you're bullish on Godwin, buy him from an early second. We're okay with that. If not, try to spend a mid or don't buy him.
Certainly none of us can really talking about buying him for a first round pick at this point, just given on the uncertainty. So we just want to give that our kind of hard stance on the sand for sure is no firsts. That being said, moving on to Chris Olave. His latest concussion was the 4th confirmed, currently on IR. They haven't ruled him out the rest of the season yet that I know of, but I'd be shocked if he plays at all this year. 24 and a half years old. Before the injury, was wide receiver 45 overall, 43 in points per game. A lot of really disappointing weeks as a guy who had a decent amount of Olave across across his portfolio, now has none. I'm out. How are you guys handling this situation before I go on my I'm out rant?
Do you want me to go first? Because he's near and dear to my heart. One of my favorite Buckeyes.
I didn't think I had to tell you you go first on Buckeyes.
Look, I'm terrified for his career. That's, like we said, fourth concussion. You never know how players are going to react. From everything I've heard, there's not like a set number of concussions before it's going to be guaranteed or recommended to retire. It just depends on how each one is and how severe they are. It's a lot, though. And he's only 24. He's already a millionaire. He's got, a whole life ahead of him. I don't think he's going to retire. If you were going to guarantee me he's not going to retire, I would definitely pay the prices we have listed here. But with the ambiguity there and the fact that I'm already pretty exposed to him, I'm not really looking to buy personally. But if I don't have Olave, I would spend a late first to have some exposure to him still.
Yeah, I personally had 0% exposure before I actually acquired him from Justin. And we had a Lad McConkey trade, I think you mentioned on the show last week. But he's in the same situation as Tua, right? It's pretty much the exact same situation where he's had multiple concussions. And for me, I want to ask you guys what percentage chance you think he retires. But with him not getting that big contract yet and him knowing how much money he can make as one of these stud wide receivers, I think maybe that pushes him a little bit to keep playing. It's really sad. Like, I hope that he does retire if that's what's best for his health. We don't want to see this guy, really mess up his future. But what are the odds you guys think that he retires? I'll start with you, Justin.
I'd put the odds 75% that he plays another game in the NFL. Like, I'd say 25% chance at most. And I think it's probably honestly lower than that. 10% maybe chance that he retires is honestly, now that I say it out loud, probably more what I feel comfortable with. There's just so much risk baked in. He's under contract in a bad situation, in a bad offense. Best case scenario is they get a new quarterback because Derek Carr just does not do it for him. We've seen those two do not mesh together on the field. Like,
it's true.
He wasn't performing before the injuries, So I think regardless of if he retires or not, it's just by the time he's in a better situation, he's 26. I just if I can get a first and re-roll, I'm taking probably any first and trying to re-roll for him, to be honest.
Dang. Wow.
I don't know if YouTube will allow me to do this, but if I can insert the clip of Mike McDaniel talking about Tua's concussions, where he was asked to speculate on that same question, basically said, out of respect for the player, I'm not going to. I'm going to put that clip in here because I don't know. We don't know. It's impossible to know unless you're, close to Chris Olave. I hope he comes back, though. That's all I'm going to say on it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just talking like brass tacks, if you're saying it's like 10 to 20% chance that he retires, I mean, I think I know how you feel about him, David. I think he's one of those guys who is just phenomenal. I mean, we saw his like yards per route run like stacked up Garrett Wilson. I think he's one of those guys that could be like a top 12 wide receiver in the league and could be worth 2 firsts again if he does come back and he looks good to start the year. With those odds, I mean, for a late first, I think I would be willing to take that risk personally.
I'm not a Las Vegas odds maker, etc. That's the odds of him not coming back and playing another game, but it's always just going to be one more concussion and then what? It's the same thing as it is with Tua, except wide receivers don't have a million rules protecting them. There is the no leading with the helmet, undefended wide receiver rule, etc. But there's a lot more brutal hits against wide receivers than there are against quarterbacks. It's a lot harder to keep a player playing that position safe, especially if you listen to Michael Thomas's Twitter rants about how bad of a quarterback Derek Carr is.
I do think one thing's for sure. If he plays again, he's going to be wearing a Guardian cap because he was talking about it before this last.
Hope so. Hopefully it helps, yeah.
And I am curious, David, so then are you holding all of your shares? You have a decent exposure to him. Obviously not, you don't want to speculate about the health, etc., but you have to make business decisions for your fantasy football teams. What decisions are you making for all the places you have him at this point?
So far, I've been holding him. I haven't shopped him. I'm not saying I wouldn't consider trading him. And obviously, if I did, it would be at a discount to when he's healthy. But I'm certainly not trying to get out intentionally because I don't think I can get a first. To be honest, I mean, maybe a late 25 first, but how many rebuilders have late 25 first that they want to spend right now? Certainly competitors not going to buy them off you. Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're in a league together, feel free to send an offer. Mid 26 first, I think you might have a better shot at. And if it's a random 26 first, I don't mind re-rolling. We've seen the upside of him, though, and I think they're going to replace Derek Carr. We saw, a more up-to-date offense with some pre-snap motion and stuff that was really helping. I do think if he gets healthy and the next guy we're going to talk about gets healthy, they get a new quarterback, they could have a good offense next year. It might not be great, but I don't know, maybe that's too much hopium for a player I love. I don't know.
I love him too. I mean, his reception perception stuff he showed as one of the best separators, so that's what really made me excited about him, combined with the speed and the numbers that we did see from him as a rookie and second-year player.
Especially talking about this week, the week of the game, and when he came into my life personally his freshman year in that game, game, big touchdown reception, block punt. He had an amazing freshman year game against the team up north. I might be a little sentimental this week, and I'm also on cold medicine, so I love Olave. I'm going to hold him. That's what I'm doing.
For me, it's just you had to pitch a lot of things going right. He needs to come back actually healthy, stay healthy. They need to fix the quarterback situation. Are they still even going to have the same coaching staff, et cetera, that you said has fixed the situation? I mean, it's just there's a lot of variability there, and it's so many variables that. So if I have to take less than a first for him, I'm not probably willing to sell him. I feel like I got about a late first valuation for him in the trade I did with JP, which, like I said, is happy. I would not take less than a first. Though it could be the 111, 112 is what it looks like right now. I'd probably be willing to take that, though, to be honest. Moving on again to our next 3 wide receivers. We're going to try to be a little bit briefer because they are either older or just not as historically significant. First, we're going to start with Rashid Shaheed. Heck of a start to this season. Was wide receiver 17 overall, 25 in points per game before his injury. 26.2 years old, even though he came into the league the same year as Olave. And currently wide receiver 53 on Keep Trade Cut, ranked about a 25 late second. I think I'd probably rather re-roll than go here, but he was balling out. I don't know. How are you guys feeling on that price point?
He's going to be almost 27. He's in that same bad situation. He might be slow to start the year coming off that torn meniscus. Not a lot to pay for a late second, but it was just too small of a sample for me to really think that he can be a guy that I'm confident, like truly confident starting every single week. So I start 11, he's a nice flex, maybe even start 10 as well. But yeah, I don't feel very confident that he's that guy as opposed to maybe like a Gabe Davis kind of guy where he pops off here and there. I think he's probably a little bit better than that, but there's just so much ambiguity. I'd rather hold the second.
Yeah, unless it's best ball, I'm definitely holding the second. If it's best ball, maybe just because then you don't have to pick when to start him. You just get those blow up games. Like you said, he's going to be 27 here soon. He's in a bad situation like we've been talking about for a few minutes now with Olave. I'd just rather have the flexibility pretty much every time.
Yeah, I lean towards the flexibility as well, but if he didn't say best ball, I'd say I'd pay a late second in best ball. Moving on to Christian Kirk. Broken collarbone, 6 to 12 week injury typically. I'm pretty sure that teams that are being talked about for the 101 usually aren't in playoff contention. Is that correct? Or for the number 1 pick in the NFL draft?
That's a wise observation, Justin.
I'm going to take a shot in the dark. He's out the rest of the year then based off of that. 28 years old, before the injury, very mediocre. Wide receiver 43 overall, 53rd in points per game. Guy I was starting in one league and he was giving me some goose eggs. Currently, wide receiver 67 on Keep Trade Cut. Price point is around an early 25 third. At that price point, I'm willing to take the shot that he comes back and gets some chemistry again. But if it's anything more than a single third, first of all, are you guys even willing to pay that single third?
I don't think so. I was trying to sell him for late seconds last year when he was healthy. You guys have been a little higher on him than I have, so I understand taking a flyer on an early third because that's all an early third is anyways, but I'd just rather have the flexibility. I'm kind of out on Kirk personally.
Yeah, with the hit rate of thirds, I'd probably send it unless I think I have the 301, 302. Yeah, I'd probably take Kirk.
Yeah, it just depends on my wide receiver room. If I have 6 or 7 wide receivers, I'm certainly keeping the flexibility. But if I know that next year I'm probably going to need a wide receiver, I don't have draft picks that are going to get me that wide receiver that I can just have. I view him as a potential depth piece bye-week filler next year. I'm not buying him for that if I'm expecting him to be in my lineup week in and week out. I learned my mistake this year with Christian Kirk.
Yeah, I mean, he had a couple of years before this where he was pretty good. And I will say the first 2 weeks, he was abysmal. He had 0 points essentially the first 2 weeks. But then from there on out, he at least was putting up wide receiver 3 numbers, which is not super significant. But I think it was a little bit better after that second week. But yeah, it's still not an exciting player that, like David said, he's not very liquid, honestly, for a wide receiver. Not a lot of people really believe in him, it seems like.
And last wide receiver we want to talk about here, Stephon Diggs, wide receiver 59 on Keep Trade Cut. Torn his ACL. Seems like it was only his ACL, but it was a little later in the season. 31 years old. Before the injury, was wide receiver 6 overall, 13 in points per game. That was before their bye week then, right? Currently wide receiver 59, as previously mentioned, was giving some high-end production, not under contract whatsoever. No idea where he's going to be. What are we doing with him? Nobody that I've talked to who has him is willing to sell him for less than a second.
I've got an inbox offer where I'm getting him and a fourth and giving up Sutton, and I don't think I'm there because I think Sutton, even after this year's got a bit more upside just because of Diggs' age. ACL tear's rough. I mean, if I've got some seconds and I can send a truly late 25 seconds, I'd probably do it just because the upside exists for, maybe one more year as long as I'm competing in 26. But man, it's hard to buy him right now. It's hard to sell him too. I've got him in a few spots and there's no way I'm selling him for what it looks like I could get.
I have the legitimate 301 in a league. Will you sell him to me there? Mega Dynasty, David? What's good?
Probably not, but maybe. I mean, you could send it.
Send it. JP, talk about something else. I'm going to send this trade real quick.
If it is a late second, I think I'm going to hold the late second because with his age, I view him as like a 1 to 2 year rental. And who knows if that first year is even going to be great with the ACL. And maybe he gets cast off to the Panthers or something. Like, it's just so much unknown. I'd rather hold the flexibility personally. And I kind of want to ask you guys who you prefer between Rashid Shaheed, Christian Kirk, and Stephon Diggs. Rank them. I think Kirk is probably last.
Yeah, Kirk would be last for sure. I think I'll just take Diggs because I think if he can get healthy and land in a good spot, he has another wide receiver one season in him. But if it's best ball, I think I'll take Shaheed.
I think I agree with that right there. If it's start 12 or start 13, I'll take Shaheed. Or if it's best ball, otherwise I'd go Diggs, Shaheed, Kirk in that order. And after I pulled up my phone and was going to send the 301 for Diggs, I don't even want to buy him for that. I couldn't even send the offer.
That's funny.
Maybe I'll spot it and I'll send it later. I'm like, I don't really want to give up the flexibility for him. And after all that 45-ish minutes right there talking about quarterbacks and wide receivers, we're going to spend almost no time on running backs and tight ends. Not really anybody of note with any serious injuries left at this point. Of course, we did see CMC, Pacheco, etc. injured earlier in the season, but they are both essentially back. Jonathan Brooks is ramping up back. So there's not really any like injury dip by wide receivers, which is more the point of this. But we do want to have a brief conversation about what we saw from the RB injuries compared to previous years, etc. David, you had some statistics you wanted to read perhaps to start off the conversation just about riding back versus wide receiver injuries this year.
It's at least a good way to start this conversation because we typically think of the running back position as the one that's more susceptible to injuries. And I think over the course of a career, that's probably still true, but it kind of suggests maybe we overreact in the way that we draft at least. So look, of top 12 running backs in points per game, and I chose points per game because total points would filter out a lot of these injured players. We have three running backs that missed a total of 6 games. Mixon missed 3, James Cook 1, Kenneth Walker 2. Top 12 wide receivers, 7 of those 12 have missed time for a combined 29 games. Kupp missed 4, Nico 5, T. Higgins 5, Godwin 4, and the rest of the season. AJB 3, Neighbors 2, and Rice 7 plus the rest of the season. So going wide receiver heavy early probably hurt you this year. I'm not sure how much we should change the way we approach these positions, but I do think that is enough to at least talk about it.
I mean, even Puka Nacua, I'm surprised he's not top 12, and he's another guy you could add to his list essentially.
Yeah, there were a lot, and I almost went to 15 just to get Pacheco's injury in the running backs, but I figured I'd stop at wide receiver and running back ones.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting point there. Looking at that list right there, we see T, Godwin, Neighbors, Rice. None of those guys were really necessarily Nico as well. Guys we expected to be actually wide receiver ones if healthy. Kupp, not really so much either. So I don't know that it's necessarily like if you drafted them early versus late. Like, I don't know how informative it is for, like predicting injuries, anything like that. But I will bring up like just a point based off of this, which is with the exception of Rashee Rice, we have seen guys come in and like step up and replace, but that's because they were guys who knew the offense, Juju, or were just him in Hopkins. So Juju Smith-Schuster was able to PPR his way there. But when Neighbors was out, when Godwin's out, when Higgins is out, when Collins is out, when Kupp is out, there hasn't really been anybody that's like truly like stepped up into like a starter worthy role that wasn't already a starter, right? In fact, I think Demarcus Robinson's best games came when they came back, when Kupp and Puka came back. So like, do we feel like it's able to inform inform like roster construction like at all, or just that maybe we want to have one or two more startable wide receivers like in our roster construction, but it doesn't change where we're trying to like roster a lower threshold of wide receiver at all for me. Does it for either of you guys?
Yeah, no, I think that's very much true. Maybe we can see where that cutoff is. Would it be like maybe a top 50 dynasty wide receivers we want? And then after that, maybe it's top 60, the guys we don't really care about as much unless they're rookies. I think that's a great point because you see random running backs step in all the time. I mean, Jeremy McNichols for the Washington Commanders, he steps in and he's useful. So I think it's a really good roster construction talk right there because, yeah, wide receivers, like you said, they just don't step up. It's not a same one-to-one you step into this role because wide receivers, they're just so different. Some plays X, flanker, slot. There's so many positions within the position. And yeah, I just think it adds so much more nuance to the wide receiver position when it comes to filling in for injuries.
Yeah, I think, Justin, you kind of hit it on the head for me personally. The big takeaways, maybe where I only wanted one or two solid receivers, maybe three, depending on how deep the bench was, how deep the starting lineup was. I only want a few threshold wide receivers on my bench and the rest running backs. Maybe I need to up that by one or two on each team just to get through a season. But again, if you have enough picks, you have enough flexibility to fill needs. So I don't know. I do think this is very interesting, and I think it's something we should reflect on at the end of the season when we collect a little more data on it and take a little more of a historical view on it. Definitely interesting and definitely contrary to what we went into the season expecting.
And JP, you mentioned earlier when we were just discussing this, just talking about last year's quarterback injuries, right? We saw so many quarterbacks go down last year, and this year there's been some quarterbacks go down, but it has not been quite as many, or it has not felt like quite as many, at least to me. I haven't done research to see if it's quite as many, but anecdotally, it doesn't feel like last year, does it to either of you guys?
Yeah, no, I mean, last year, I've pulled it up here, 66 different quarterbacks started in an NFL game last year. 66. And I'd be surprised if we were at 50. And I mean, we still got some time left, but yeah, there's not nearly the amount of significant quarterback injuries. I mean, we talked about only 4 guys, and one of them is JJ McCarthy, who hasn't even touched the field. He kind of wasn't even sure if he was going to be starting in the 2024 season. So yeah, I think it's just pretty random no matter what the position is.
This year, it's been more quarterback, or a decent number of quarterback benchings, not even just injuries, as well. Bryce Young, A. Rich, Daniel Jones. So benchings for some of those QB changes. So I almost feel like we'd have to look for benchings too when we compare them at the end of the year. But I think just our point we've talked about throughout the offseason, et cetera, that we just want to reiterate is we do prefer to roster those backup running backs with our bench spots. It hasn't paid off that much this year.
No,
right?
Not at all, really.
I've had some success with it, still maybe not as much as last year, but more so in the guys like Chase Brown, who was in a timeshare but took over, having Tyrone Tracy, who took over his job, not due to, well, I guess Singletary missed some time, but it seems like he was going to take over inevitably anyways. So,
but even if it hasn't paid off, with frequent, every week, there's one or two guys across your portfolio that you can slide in as a, RB2 type of confidence level. There's seasons where you feel like that, where if you play with any RB on a 53 lineup, you feel like every week across your portfolio, you're able to slide in one or two guys most weeks. It hasn't quite felt like that throughout this year. But if anything, hopefully other people stop adopting the strategy, because I think with the variance, RB injuries are going to continue coming, and RBs and QBs are the only ones are going to get most or all of the work. So I think it's just important to stress that we still feel like that is the right strategy, even if the dividends have not been quite as high this year, quite as rewarding this year.
100%.
Yep, I agree with that for sure.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Dyno Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or review. And from all of us here at the Dyno Construction Podcast, until next time.